Hello everyone, welcome to Yuhan's channel. Here we explore life in China from culture and traditions to modern mentalities. Today we are talking about a concept you have probably heard, Guanxi. If you have spent any time in China or with the Chinese community, this word likely came up quickly. In fact, for my husband, it was one of the very first Chinese words he learned after arriving. So, what exactly is Guanxi? Literally, it means connection or personal relationship. As social beings, humans everywhere rely on networks. But in China, Guanxi carries a deeper, more nuanced weight. It's often seen as a crucial resource for personal survival and advancement. In some contexts, Guanxi can have a negative feeling. When my husband started working here, he noticed some colleagues who seemed underqualified for their roles. When he asked how they got their positions, the answer from both foreigners and Chinese was always the same: they have Guanxi. It was presented as an unchangeable fact, not open for discussion. In my work as a curator, I say the similar thing. If I encounter an artwork that seems out of place or of poor quality, the explanation is often the artist has Guanxi. It's a collective understanding, a conversation ender. Perhaps the artist is the child of someone influential or has close ties to a decision maker. Another common phrase is 找关系, which means to look for connections. While this is less common today than maybe 10 or 20 years ago, it still happens. Imagine you want your child to attend a good public school, but residency rules are a barrier. If you have a direct connection to someone in the school's administration, that's ideal. If not, you start asking around. You might discover that your neighbor's aunt is a distant relative of the headmaster. That kind of connection, however faint, becomes a potential pathway. You could have a personal meeting or some inside information. This is where people often think of corruption. And while Guanxi can involve it, it's not always about bribes. It can be about reciprocal favors. Perhaps you once helped your neighbor by asking your uncle, a specialist doctor, to perform surgery on their father. Now the neighbor's aunt feels obligated to help you in return by speaking to the headmaster. In this way, countless personal relationships become intertwined, creating a society deeply connected through these networks. But Guanxi isn't just about navigating systems. It's also deeply tied to trust. We Chinese naturally tend to trust people within our Guanxi network. For example, recently I needed a minor surgery. A colleague mentioned that her friend's husband is a doctor at the hospital I was going to. While there were over at least 30 doctors in the department, I immediately felt drawn to him and hoped he would perform my surgery. Even though I knew nothing about his skills compared to the others, I can't fully explain it. It's an instinctual sense of trust through connection. These small interactions are woven profoundly into the fabric of Chinese life. We often describe ours as a relationship-based society or an acquaintance society. Of course, this system has significant drawbacks. It can be a threat to equality and can sometimes normalize corruptions or whatever. These criticisms are valid and widely discussed. But today, instead of adding to the criticism, I want to explore how this system formed and what social functions it has. This is a massive topic, and I don't claim to have all the answers. I'm going to lean on a foundational work of Chinese sociology, Fei Xiaotong's From the Soil. I should say that this is just my humble attempt to understand and share these ideas, hoping to sort things out for myself as much as for you. First, a brief introduction to the book and its author. The Chinese title is 乡土中国. The version I am using here is the 1992 English translation published by the University of California Press. It's a relatively small book, compiled from a series of essays Fei wrote in the 1940s. Fei Xiaotong is one of the most influential sociologists in China. In his time, the early 20th century, sociology was a brand new discipline in China, and it quickly gained popularity. Many intellectuals believed that this scientific approach to studying society could provide a blueprint for reforming and saving the nation from its chaotic state. While many thought the solution was to simply adapt Western theories, Fei was skeptical. Despite his own rigorous Western academic training, he understood that Chinese society had its own unique structure and operating principles. He argued that unless we first understood these fundamental differences, no pre-existing model from the West could be successfully applied. He devoted years to field research, making great personal sacrifices, and ultimately concentrated his ideas into works that opened up new horizons for generations of Chinese thinkers. I deeply admire scholars like him. His work reminds me of a basic wish I have for making these videos, that before we make criticisms or judgments, we try our best to truly comprehend a subject. Everyone has a right to their preferences, but it's always better when those preferences are based on an understanding, right? After all, few things in this diverse world are absolutely right or wrong. Okay, let's get back to the book and see what From the Soil can teach us about Guanxi. The book is a collection of 14 essays written over 80 years ago, so naturally not every observation perfectly fits modern China. I won't cover everything, but I want to point out a few key ideas that help explain patterns I have seen in my own life. The very first sentence of the book states that Chinese society is fundamentally rural. This is the core premise. For millennia, the vast majority of Chinese people made their living from the soil. This long agricultural history meant people were deeply rooted to one place. It was normal for farming families to live in the same spot for generations. Of course, populations grew and some people had to leave to find new land, but as Fei Xiaotong poetically writes, these migrants will be like the seeds blowing from the trees by the wind, creating the same small lineage-based villages that they have left behind. This attachment to a specific piece of land continued for thousands of years. The longing to settle down, to own land, and the irreplaceable sense of security offered by a hometown become deeply inscribed in our cultural DNA. Even today, as China undergoes one of the world's fastest urbanizations, with millions moving to the cities, this foundational mindset is still there. This reminds me of a story my husband told me. Growing up in Madrid, he noticed the Chinese shops from a very young age. He had the feeling that the owners would never leave their often dimly lit shops. They practically lived in them. Even though they must have earned good money, nobody seemed to buy houses in the neighborhood, and they showed little intention of integrating into the local community, despite living there for decades. But from a traditional Chinese perspective, this behavior makes perfect sense. It's not a lack of desire for a home, but a different definition of it. Their story in our culture imagination is a classic narrative. Someone works hard overseas, makes their fortune, and then achieves the ultimate dream, 衣锦还乡, returning to their hometown in glory and wealth. There, they have the ability to buy land and finally fulfill the cycle of 落叶归根, the fallen leaf returns to its roots. The goal wasn't to put down new roads in Madrid, but to get the resources to return to the old ones. This deep-seated belonging to a hometown, even if it's not the most prosperous place, is powerful because it's their place. Fei Xiaotong argues that this immobility and enduring attachment to the soil creates a unique relationship between people and space. One consequence of this is that traditional Chinese rural society was characterized by a certain solitude and isolation. Within these isolated, self-contained communities, everyone knows everyone else. As Fei describes it, This is a society without strangers, a society based totally on the familiar, and from this constant, intimate familiarity, a specific kind of trust is born. Now you might think that modern city life would devalue this kind of trust, but I think it's quite the opposite. Precisely because the city is full of uncertainties and strangers, we instinctively turn to this deeply ingrained model of familiarity trust to recreate a sense of security. In a vast, cold city, a personal connection, a Guanxi, becomes a precious anchor, a reliable signal of trust in a sea of unknowns. So, how do these personal connections Guanxi form and function? Fei Xiaotong answers this with a brilliant theoretical model for Chinese social structure, 差序格局, or the differential mode of association. A common criticism of Chinese social behavior from both outsiders and ourselves is a perceived selfishness, particularly in public matters. Fei points to a classic proverb: each person should sweep the snow from his own doorstep and should not fret about the frost on his neighbor's roof. He vividly described how this attitude once led to the severe pollution of Suzhou's river, as everyone focused only on their own immediate place. While today's cities are cleaner thanks to public administrations and growing civic awareness, this underlying mentality often persists. But this raises a crucial question. Who is this self? Does this mean Chinese society is individualistic? Fei argues the issue is not individualism, but how the boundary between the self and the group is drawn, and how this line has been drawn in China traditionally is obviously different from the way it is drawn in the West. To illustrate this, Fei created a powerful metaphor. He described the Western social structure as being like bundles of rice straw. After harvest, the rice straw is bound into small bundles. Several bundles are bound into larger bundles, and these are then stacked together. The separate straws, the separate bundles, and finally the separate stacks all fit together to make up the whole haystack. In this model, which he called 团体格局, or the organizational mode of association, individuals are members of distinct organizations. Your identity and responsibilities are clearly defined by which specific bundle you belong to, be it a company, a club, or the state. The Chinese pattern, however, is fundamentally different. Fei suggests it is more like the concentric circles that ripple out when a stone is thrown into a lake. Everyone stands at the center of the circles produced by his or her own social influence. In this differential mode of association, your social world is a series of expanding circles centered on yourself. The closest circle contains your immediate family and so on. The next might include close friends and extended family, with relationships and obligations weakening with each successive circle. This is why kinship has been so paramount in Chinese culture. It's the most powerful and natural set of ripples. The fact that we have over 100 terms for different relatives, one of the most complex kinship systems in the world, demonstrates this intricate mapping of relationships from the self outward. While kinship is no longer the only basis for these circles today, the structure remains. The model is elastic and self-centered. This is not Western individualism. It is a form of egocentrism, where moral obligations are not fixed but vary depending on one's relative position in another person's network of circles. This is why the boundary between public and private is often ambiguous. As Fei said, our Chinese may sacrifice our families for our own self-interests, our party for the family's interests, our country for the party's interests, and the whole world for the country's interests. It's not a rejection of collective responsibility, but a prioritization of the collectives defined by one's own Guanxi networks. It might sound not so honorable, and it is still selfish, but personally I think this is a kind of truth how the world is operating. For sure, we all hold the idea of universal equality for every human being, but while the wars and conflicts are still going on, we are still fighting a certain nation, a certain race, or a certain piece of land. To the core, we are fighting for self and the interests. Whether that self is an individual, a tribe, or a country, it is not for the abstract good of all humanity, right? The Chinese concept of Guanxi and the differential mode of association simply makes this tendency explicit and structured in everyday social life. It acknowledges that our moral obligations are not absolute, but are relative, flowing outward from the self like ripples in water, diminishing in strength as they go. Okay, I wanted to cover more of the main ideas from the soil, but we have merely talked about 2 chapters. There are so much more to explore, like Faith's fascinating analysis of morality within this structure, which we can definitely save for a future episode. I hope this discussion has helped you get a rough idea of what Guanxi is and the deep cultural soil from which it grows. So, thank you so much for watching and spending this time with me. I truly appreciate it. Have a lovely rest of your day, and if you have any thoughts or questions, please feel free to leave a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. See you next time.